So, episode 18 of Fire Country spends almost its entire runtime trying to convince viewers that its central friendships are deep, emotional, and unbreakable. The problem is that after 4 seasons, the show still hasn't really done enough work to make that dynamic feel natural. Best Man revolves around Jake's bachelor party, which honestly creates an unintentionally funny issue right from the start. A lot of viewers probably forgot Jake even had a fiance. That's not entirely the audience's fault either. Victoria Mitchell has barely been developed as an actual presence in the story, which makes an entire episode centered around Jake preparing for marriage feel strangely hollow. The episode keeps insisting that this wedding matters emotionally, but it hasn't really earned the investment. Instead, the arc mostly functions as another attempt to reinforce the idea that Jake, Eve, and Bod are lifelong best friends whose bond has survived into adulthood unchanged. The series constantly tells viewer this relationship is important, but too often it relies on nostalgia heavy scenes instead of genuinely showing meaningful emotional chemistry between the characters. And unfortunately, the episode keeps falling into the same trap. Fire Country always does. Everything eventually circles back to making Board look heroic. The bachelor party itself takes the crew out of Edgewater and into San Francisco, which at least gives the episode a slightly different atmosphere. To be fair, the urban setting is a nice visual change from the show's usual rugged small town environment, but the actual party storyline is surprisingly dull. For an episode supposedly built around chaos and celebration, almost nothing about the bachelor party feels memorable. The activities are oddly tamed and the humor rarely lands. The episode even builds tension around drunk people throwing axes, which feels less exciting and more genuinely irresponsible, considering alcohol and impaired motor skills obviously don't mix. Then there's the random tech bro antagonist who keeps provoking the group. The problem is that the setup feels painfully transparent from the beginning. The second he starts causing trouble, it becomes obvious the show is preparing him to become the eventual emergency victim later in the episode. There's zero suspense because Fire Country telegraphs every beat far too early. At the same time, the episode continues one of the show's most frustrating ongoing habits, bending logic and morality to protect Board at all cost. Luke once again enables Board instead of holding him accountable for attacking someone earlier in the season. Rather than allowing consequences to play out naturally, Luke simply uses his authority to make the problem disappear. And the episode somehow frames this as an emotional support rather than blatant corruption. What makes it more frustrating is that the show still tries to portray Board as morally noble for wanting to confess. But by this point, it's hard not to notice how often Board's selflessness is really tied to his own need for emotional validation. He constantly needs to feel like the savior, the martyr, or the misunderstood hero. Everything becomes about Board's redemption journey, even when it damages other characters or storylines in the process. Ironically, there are actual glimpses of stronger storyline buried inside the episode. The Malcolm storyline, for example, briefly touches on genuinely interesting questions about merit versus favoritism. Eve raises completely valid concerns about Malcolm joining Station 42 despite not being physically ready for the job. The show finally acknowledges the obvious issues viewers have been discussing for weeks. Malcolm hasn't even passed his fitness requirement yet. That conflict could have led to a compelling exploration of whether personal connection should outweigh professional standards. But instead, the episode rushes through the problem almost immediately. Malcolm solves one issue during the San Francisco emergency, and suddenly everyone acts like all concerns have disappeared. The show keeps over the hard conversation and moves directly towards preserving group harmony again. That's really the core problem with Fire Country at this point. It constantly introduces potentially meaningful tension, but rarely commits to exploring the consequences fully because the writers always prioritize keeping the central friend group emotionally impact. Oddly enough, some of the episode's best material comes from the smaller side story involving Manny. While the younger firefighters are away, Manny participates in a station fundraiser and connects with a struggling single father. Those scenes actually contain real emotional weight, especially when Manny reflects on his own experience as a parent. For a moment, the episode feels grounded and sincere in a way the main bachelor party storyline never quite manages. But even that subplot stumbles with questionable decision making. The man steals money, and instead of emphasizing accountability, the resolution basically rewards him financially anyway. The emotional intention behind the scene is understandable, but the execution feels bizarrely naive. Meanwhile, the episode quietly resolves Roberta's storyline without dragging viewers into another unnecessary love triangle, which honestly might be one of the smartest choices the writers make all are. By the end, Best Man feels like a perfect summary of both the strength and weakness of Fire Country. There are flashes of compelling emotional drama buried beneath the surface. Certain character interactions still work, some storyline hint at deeper themes involving loyalty, accountability, and identity. But the show repeatedly undercuts itself by refusing to let consequences stick, forcing emotional beats that haven't properly developed, and constantly reshaping the narrative around board's importance. The result is an episode that isn't terrible but feels exhausting in how hard it tries to manufacture emotional investment instead of naturally earning it. Thank you for watching. Bye.